Good evening. There have been a lot of questions on Patreon about Pesach, the Passover, and how to do it, and when to do it, and what to do it, and why to do it, and who to do it with, etc., etc. And so I present to you Passover, a practical approach. Caveats. I am not an expert at this. I've been doing Passover for 5 years now, and the vast majority of understanding I have in how to do Passover comes from the Bible, not from traditions of men or anything else. Mistakes that I've made along the way and how we've dealt with that, etc. Also, huge caveat, and we'll start with when here momentarily. And I wanted to get this out ASAP because Passover is coming up on us pretty quickly, and I have some travel days in between now and then. So I wanted to get this out. When? Dates. Dates can be tricky. I've seen fellowship be broken over dates, arguments about dates, to the tune of a 24-hour difference. People have broken fellowship. I'm not that way. I think it's more important that we are all together, that the people that we want to, are commanded to do Passover with are together in one place at one time, than it is specifically to have the exact date and time. And is this Jerusalem time or is it local time? Right? Exactly. So, and there's prescription in Numbers chapter 9 for people who missed the first Passover. They did it again a month later. And so my understanding of that is it matters more to Yahweh, our Elohim, the Lord our God, that we do it than we do it precisely on the exact date and time that he prescribes. We'll dive into that in a moment. Last caveat / asterisk is this is not meant to be combative. If you don't feel like you need to keep Passover or it's done away with or it's nailed to a cross or whatever, that's fine. Don't keep listening. I have no interest in arguing with anybody about anything. I'm simply making this video to provide information as I understand it with my limited knowledge over the last half a decade and how we have done this based upon the word of Yah. If you don't want to do this or you do this differently, that's fine. I'm not here to start arguments, and I would appreciate as much respect as you could muster when we're talking about a subject like this, because it is a remembrance of the sacrifice that Yeshua, our Messiah, made on behalf of us upon the stake to be the covering of blood to remove our sins so that we would not die due to our lawlessness. I don't want to argue with anybody about that. So if we are in agreement with that, we can move forward. When? This year, all the Jewish calendars, and no, I'm not Jewish, and no, neither are you. The Jews are one of 12 tribes of Israel. The Gentile believer, Romans 11:16, is grafted into the tree of life, which is, of course, a euphemism for Israel. And if you read that chapter in Romans, it makes absolutely clear that it's not talking about a tree, it's talking about a body of believers, and that is Israel. Genesis 32, if you're wondering what exactly is Israel, Israel is he who has struggled with Elohim, with God, he who has overcome with Elohim, God, by the blood of Yeshua, and he who is ruling with Elohim, God. Because in Exodus 19, we are commanded to be a nation of kings and priests unto him. Yeah. He who is struggling with Elohim, overcoming with Elohim, and ruling with Elohim, that is Israel. And that is the tree of life that we're grafted into. That being said, elder brother Judah is super enamored with dates and times, and practically every single calendar this year has Passover listed as starting on the 5th of April, with the first day of unleavened bread on the 6th of April, and the last day of unleavened bread being the 12th of April. If you keep different dates, that's fine, and I will tell you, nobody has this perfectly, including me, including us. We've had some hullabaloo about dates ourselves this year, and again, it matters more that we do it than that we do it. This is me speaking, based upon the example it's given to us in the book of Numbers chapter 9 by Yahweh our Elohim. It matters more that we do it, and we do it with a willing heart, and we do it out of thankfulness for the sacrifice of our Messiah, than that we do it precisely at the exact date and time. And again, is that local or is that Jerusalem time? And which calendar are we operating off of? Exactly. So for all intents and purposes, the dates that we're operating off of here is 5th April is Pesach, Passover. The 6th of April is the first day of unleavened bread. The 12th of April is the last day of unleavened bread. If you want different dates, that's fine. You're supposed to count off of the sighted moon. And there seems to be some discrepancy over when is the moon sighted. Again, I'm not jumping into those rabbit holes here. Frankly, for me, they don't matter. The obedience of the heart matters way more than the exactness of your observance. My opinion. So, dates. I don't know, but this is what I got. Sighted moon. When was the moon sighted? Define sighted moon. Was it a sliver of the moon? Was it the full moon? Was it the dark of the moon? What exactly? Right? And people lose their ever-loving minds over this. Now, the go-to chapter for all of the high holy days, the Moedim, is Leviticus 23. We start in verse 4. These are the appointed times of Yahweh, set-apart gatherings, which you are to proclaim at their appointed times. You have an appointment with Dad. He wants to see you. In the first new moon, on the 14th day of the new moon, between the evenings, is the Pesach, the Passover to Yahweh. And the 15th day of this new moon is the festival of Matzah to Yahweh. 7 days you eat unleavened bread. So, Pesach, this is an 8-day celebration. Pesach, or the Passover, is the first day of this 8 days. The second day of this 8 days is a high holy day. This is a high Sabbath. And it is the first day of unleavened bread. So day 1 of 8 is Passover. Day 2 of 8 is unleavened bread, day 1. Day 8 of 8 is unleavened bread, day 7. Okay, so that we're all tracking here. On the first day, you have a set-apart gathering. You do no servile work. This is the first day of the festival of matzah, or unleavened bread. Day 1 of unleavened bread is a high holy day, high Sabbath. Okay. You have a set-apart gathering. With who? How big is the household? Who do you want to hang out with? We'll get to that in a moment. You have a set-apart gathering. You do no servile work. You don't work. You don't earn. It's a day off from work. And you shall bring an offering made by fire to Yahweh for 7 days. Now, on the Sabbath, this is one of the few Sabbaths where you can have a fire going. So we make a fire at our fire pit for 7 days. On the 7th day is a set-apart gathering. You do no servile work. This is the 8th day of this 8-day period. The last day, the 7th day of unleavened bread. And that is also a high Sabbath. And Yahweh spoke to Moshe, saying, Speak to the children of Israel, and you shall say to them, When you come into the land which I give you, and shall reap its harvest, then you shall bring a sheaf of the first fruits of your harvest to the priest, and he shall wave the sheaf before Yahweh for your acceptance. On the morrow after the Sabbath, the priest waves it. This is the weekly Sabbath that falls somewhere in between Pesach and unleavened bread. And that Sabbath, or that date, that weekly Sabbath, is the 8th of April, sundown Friday through sundown Saturday. So the day after, that's Sunday, is the 9th of April. That's the Feast of First Fruits. And what do we do? Because here in Leviticus it says, on that day when you wave the sheaf, you prepare a male lamb, first fruits, a year old, a perfect one, as an ascending offering to Yahweh. Okay, well, Yeshua is the high priest. And our offerings, right? Has he paid it all? Yes, he's paid it all. He paid for all your sin, all your transgression, all of that. And its grain offering, 2/10 of an ephah of fine flour mixed with oil, an offering made by fire to Yahweh, a sweet fragrance, and its drink offering, 1/4 of a hin of wine. And you do not eat bread or roasted grain or fresh grain until the same day that you have brought an offering to your Elohim, a law forever throughout your generations in all your dwellings. And from the morrow after the Sabbath, from the day that you brought the sheaf of the wave offering, you count for yourself 7 completed Sabbaths. And this comes to Shavuot, or Pentecost, or the Feast of Weeks, which is outside the purview of this video. We're dealing with 3 appointed times here in this 8-day period. Pesach being the first day, unleavened bread, the beginning of, being the second day. Then somewhere in there, we have first fruits, which appears on the 9th of this year. And then on the 12th, we have the last day of unleavened bread. So during that 8-day period, we have 3 high holy days. And by the way, they're a party. They're a blast unto Yahweh your Elohim. So on first fruits, we bring the grain offering. It's flour and oil. We make a fire. We bring the grain offering. And then it's become, and I'll readily admit this, a tradition of ours, because an offering, cue Cain and Abel here, should cost you something. And we get together that morning in the morning, and you don't eat prior to this. You're not supposed to eat anything until you've brought an offering to Yah. We get together that morning as a body over this fire, and we burn something that means something to us. Deeply personal things. It's very cathartic. And you give it to Yah. And there's always a sharing of testimony. And there's not a dry eye in the place. And it's beautiful. So we give Yah what he asks of us, because he's given everything for us. He came to earth to kill himself as Yeshua so that we could come home again. Okay? So, when? That's when in a nutshell. What? The Pesach ram on day 1, which we'll deal with who in a minute, because you take a ram for your house. How big is a household? We'll touch on that in a moment. Unleavened bread. We eat unleavened bread for 8 days. Pesach, first fruits, all 7 days of unleavened bread. We do not eat leavened bread. This is the feast of unleavened bread, by the way. So this is anything that has yeast or baking soda or baking powder or anything else in it that causes bread to rise. The Jews and certain Messianic traditions will go absolutely haywire, cleaning their entire house. I've even seen Orthodox Jews in New York City take flamethrowers to their countertops in their kitchen to kill all the yeast. Leaven biblically represents sin and false doctrine. And the idea here, the removing of the leaven from your house, and you get it out of your house. It literally says take it outside of your dwelling. So we take the bread and the tortillas and anything, the crackers, the pretzels, any bread type item that has yeast in it. And again, this is what we do. We're not flamethrowing the countertops. This is what we do. We take any bread and bread type item, biscuits, coffee, cake, Little Debbie snack cakes, whatever it is, anything like that, a bread type item with leavening in it, and we put it in a tote, and we take it outside of our house, and we put it in the barn, and it stays in the barn, and we don't access it for 8 days. I know people that'll take it and put it just on the other side of their property line, so it's not even within their gates. Whatever floats your boat, homie, whatever you're into, okay? But we put it in our barn. And then every day you make matzah, and every day you eat matzah. Every being amongst you eats matzah. If you have a gluten allergy, you get a tiny little bite. Or you make some with some, fancy grain that I've never even heard of before. Quinoa matzah or whatever you might have. Einkorn matzah, whatever. Okay? But you eat unleavened bread every day. And it is a representation of the removal of that sin and that false doctrine from your house, and it breaks the pattern of behavior that you're in, because you have to stop and think. And you have to stop and think about the removal of sin and false doctrine from your house. Who is the master of your house? Whom do we serve? Did he remove sin, lawlessness, 1 John 3 verse 4? Yup. Did he remove false doctrine? Yup. I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father but through me. And so it's a remembrance. And you go through this motion for 8 days, and you remember, and you break that worldly Babylonian Mitzrayim pattern of just waking up, walking to the kitchen, making some toast, or eating some Cheerios, or whatever it is. You get rid of all that crap. And you make bread, and you eat unleavened bread. Okay? So I already talked to you about first fruits and what that looks like for us. Unleavened bread is exactly that. For 8 days, we make and eat unleavened bread, and we remove the leavened bread from our house. Not everything that contains yeast, not everything that contains baking soda or baking powder, and again, this is just what we do. But unleavened bread it is the festival of unleavened bread. And by the way, yeast is in the air. That's how you make sourdough. You can't remove all of it. It's not possible. And that's the realization that occurs, that you can't remove your sin. You can't remove your false doctrine. And all eyes now point up to Yah and to Yeshua, to the King and the High Priest, to Abba Father, who loved us enough to do this for us, because we can't do it without him. Okay? The ram. We take a ram of the first year without spot or blemish. Some translations say a perfect one. What is a perfect ram? It is a ram that is not all jacked up. No broken bones, doesn't walk with a limp, doesn't have tapeworms, doesn't have, one eye pointed two different directions. The best that you have, again, Cain and Abel. You take your best, a perfect one, the best that you have. And that's what you give to Yah. You separate him on the 10th day, and on the 14th day, you cut his throat. What day is that? 5 April 23. For us, whatever date you choose, but for us, 5 April 23. Between the evenings. So you don't break a bone of the ram's body. This is why Yeshua's legs were not broken on the stake. Because he was the covering of blood, the atonement at one meant for us. So you don't break a bone in its body. You don't shoot it in the head, a mistake that I've made previously until I realized like an idiot, oh, bullets break bones. The skull is a bone. So you cut its throat. And you will very quickly realize how cheap the phrase covered by the blood of the Lamb has become in the Christian church. You cut its throat and you watch its lifeblood bleed out of it. And if you're not overcome by the Spirit, and if you don't realize that this is what you did to Messiah, and this is what he took for us so that we wouldn't have to suffer and die, I don't think you're human. But that's just me. And then you take the ram, and we bring it to where the fire has been prepared to cook it. And you cook it with its head on, and its hooves on, and its inward parts. Now, this is a point of contention for some people. You can leave all of its guts inside the animal, or inward parts in many translations, when it says Yah searches the inward parts of man. He searches your inward parts. In many translations, that says the heart and the kidneys. And so what we do is we open it up, and we take the entrails out, the intestine, the lungs, but we leave the heart and the kidneys, the inward parts, and we cook it that way, roast it over fire with its head and its hooves intact. You are commanded to leave none of it until morning. So you take an animal that is the appropriate size for your household, and if it's too big for your household, you share it with a neighbor. Which begs the question, how big is a household? And we're going to come in a moment to, what do I do if I don't have a ram? As my pastor and brother and friend says, you do the best you can with what you got where you're at. But we'll talk about what that looks like in a moment. How big is a household? In Genesis 18, Abraham goes to war, Genesis 15 it may be, in the valley of Siddim to rescue Lot back after he's been kidnapped. And it says explicitly, he went with 318 trained men, armed retainers of his own house. I'll bet you $100 those 318 men did not live inside of Abraham's tent. But they were of his house. And so we have done households, individual households with a ram. We've done neighbors and friends with a ram for our house. We've done our entire tribe as a house. That's up to you. That's up to you to determine how big a house is. And we do take the blood as we're commanded, and we put it on the doorpost and the lintel. That's the part above the doorposts, covered by the blood of the Lamb, so that death will pass you over. Exodus 12. If you don't have a ram, get a piece of lamb. If you can't get a piece of lamb, get a piece of beef. Get a brisket. Get a rump roast. Get a standing rib roast, get a whatever. If you can't do that, if you can't afford that, you can't source that, who gave more? The one who put his tithe of silver in the coffers, or the woman who gave 2 copper bits, according to Yeshua? She gave more because she gave all she had. If you can get a burger patty and do this, get a burger patty. Again, obedience of the heart condition matters way more. The heart condition matters way more, says me, than the exact precision adherence to the written word. Should we strive for exact precision adherence to the written word? Absolutely. But do the best you can with what you got where you're at, as Pastor Joe would say. Don't get pork. Pork is unclean. Read Leviticus 11. Okay? Now, on Pesach, we do this between the evenings. What that means is in the morning, we slaughter the lamb. We start cooking it. And by afternoon, we start eating it. It's cooked. And we're commanded to leave none of it until morning. So whatever's left over, before sun comes up, you burn it with fire. Now this begs the question, what am I doing up when the sun comes up? This night, from Pesach into the first day of unleavened bread, is a night of watches. You can find that in Exodus 12, verse 42. It is a night of watches. This is why Yeshua is rebuking his apostles in the Garden of Gethsemane, saying, why can you not stay up and pray with me? Because that's what you're supposed to do. Stay up and bear witness. You eat this ram, by the way, with your loins girded and your staff in your hand, ready to go, ready to bug out, because that's what the Exodus was. It was a mass migration, a bug out from Egypt into the wilderness. And this is a remembrance of that, when the Father took us out of the house of bondage and slavery and made us free men and women. This is a night of watches. You stay up the night of Passover. And by the time the sun has come up, you've been up for more than 24 hours. And it's, there's no words for it. It's spiritually transformational. It's incredible. I recommend you do it with brothers, because you will want to fall asleep and you will need somebody to kick your chair, somebody to talk to you, somebody to sing, somebody to play guitar, somebody to pass the time with. This is a night of watches. The following day is the first day of unleavened bread. It is a holy convocation, a moedim, a high Sabbath, an appointed time. You will get together, you will fellowship, you will party. Hang out. Worship, fellowship, raise a joyous noise unto the Lord, Yahweh your Elohim. It's a high Sabbath, nobody works. We typically do a potluck for this. We make matzah. We eat, we fellowship, we hang out, we read the word. There are prescribed readings during Pesach as well. You can Google those and look those up, or use whatever search engine you're into. I don't care if you use Google or not. And as I've said, we've already addressed what first fruits looks like. I've talked about who, your household, your tribe. How big is a household? That's entirely up to you. That's entirely up to you. Now, Pesach, none can eat of it unless they be circumcised. I have seen people make the argument for physical circumcision, and I've seen people make the argument for circumcision of the heart. I'm going to say that's between you and Yah, but for us, we go with physical circumcision. Wow, that's ridiculous. Well, that's what Yah said. That gets down to why. Why are we doing this? This is a remembrance. This is a remembrance of when Yah brought us out of Mitzrayim, out of bondage, by a strong hand. Strong hand is Yod. The strong hand is Yeshua. Read that passage. The capital M, messenger of Yahuwah, Yeshua HaMashiach, the physical embodiment of Yah on earth, brought us out of bondage and slavery. And then he came again as the Son of the Most High, a righteous king in the line of King David, to suffer and die for us, to put that covering of blood over us so that we could be redeemed. The debt that we couldn't pay would be paid by a kinsman redeemer so that we could come into the house of the master and be a bondservant in the house of the master. And there is one Torah for the native born and the Israelite within your gates, and the sojourner within your gates, rather. So we do this because Yah said so, and it's a remembrance of the strong hand that brought us out of Egypt, as well as the work that Yeshua did upon the stake to redeem us, to buy us back into the household, to blot out our sin, our lawlessness, 1 John 3, verse 4. We'll do it because Yah said so. A law forever throughout all your generations and all your dwellings. How? How do we do this? I think I've touched on that already. Pesach. In between the evenings, start in the morning, slaughter the lamb, build your fire, roast it whole with its inward parts, head on, hooves on, inward parts for us, for me, my household. That means to me, heart and kidneys, because inward hearts or inward parts has been translated in myriad other translations as the heart and kidneys, your inward parts. And frankly, the parts that you take out of the animal, they're not food. You do not break a bone in the ram's body. It is a ram of the first year without spot or blemish, a perfect one, the best that you have. You cut its throat. You don't shoot it. If you can't get a ram, you get what you can get. And you come with a willing, obedient, joyous heart and offer that to Yah. And you eat it. You leave none of it left until morning. That night, Pesach, is a night of watches. So you slaughter the ram in the morning, you eat it in the afternoon. That night you stay up until sunup. It is a night of watches. The following day is a high holy day, a high Sabbath. That's the first day of unleavened bread. No yeast bread in your house. You get it out before unleavened bread starts. You get it out of your house, out of your dwelling. I don't dwell in my barn, so I put mine in my barn. And it is bread. Not wine, not mac and cheese, not seasonings, that unleavened bread. It is the feast of unleavened bread. So you get the unleavened bread out. Excuse me. And you make unleavened bread. Preferably, you make unleavened bread from scratch. If you can't, then you can buy matzah in boxes from the store. It's way better to make it yourself. There's myriad recipes online, and I've done a video on Patreon showing how we make it. Tooth to tail, how we make it, from start to finish. And it is a remembrance of the removal of sin and false doctrine from our houses. First fruits, we make an offering by fire. We do not eat before that offering has been made. We congregate together as a body. We offer the Father something that cost us something, and not just monetary, something that means something to us. We share testimonies. It's very cathartic. The Spirit moves. By the way, this entire 8-day period, the Spirit will push you around like you're a pile of dirt, and it's a D8 dozer. Be prepared for that. The first day of unleavened bread and the last day of unleavened bread are high Sabbaths. You do not work on them. First fruits is the day after the Sabbath during the week. We do not work anytime during this 8-day period because I own the company and I set what people's schedules look like. Okay? But you do you. At a minimum, the first day of unleavened bread and the last day of unleavened bread, those are high holy days. First fruits, we make an offering, we bring it by fire, we fellowship, we congregate, we share testimony. And all of this is a remembrance. Now again, to reiterate, I in no way am looking to start an argument. I in no way am an expert, and I am in no way trying to convince you that you need to do this. This video is a practical application of what Pesach, unleavened bread, and first fruits looks like for us in our home, and this is how we do it. If you need this as a reference, use it as a reference. This one video on Patreon, and I may post it on YouTube at some point. This one video you may share. This one video you may share. Because this belongs to Yah. It does not belong to me. I hope that helped clear up some of the questions that you have about Passover, Pesach, unleavened bread, and first fruits, and how we observe those, knowing that by grace through faith we are saved, lest any man should boast. We do this out of obedience and thankfulness to Yeshua. 1 Peter 2:21, for this you are called, Messiah, having suffered for your sins, that you might walk in his steps. Read the Gospels. We know he did this. We know he did Passover. We know he did Shavuot. We know he did Sukkot. We know he was in Jerusalem for first fruits. We know that he observed unleavened bread. I believe that the Last Supper was the Passover meal. Some people can take contention with that, and that's fine. I believe, based upon the timelines provided in the Gospels, that it was the Passover meal. And it's possible that it was because it was observed between the evenings, and he was still crucified upon the stake at 3 p.m. when everybody else would have been slaughtering their lamb. And that night in the Garden of Gethsemane, before he was crucified, was the night of watches, which is why he was begging his men to stay up with him. But that's neither here nor there. That's just my understanding of it. And again, I do not want a tidal wave of comments about why you should or shouldn't do this, or how you do it differently, or why you chose different dates, or how big your household is, or what exactly your observance looks like. This is meant to be a reference for those who have expressed an interest in learning more about how to do the Pesach, and to explain how we do it, knowing that I am in no way perfect at this. I've got 5 years in, and I've made more mistakes than I can count in my ongoing efforts to be obedient to the calling that Yahweh put on my heart. That being said, I really do hope that this video is a blessing to y'all who have asked these questions. I love you deeply, and I hope you have a blessed evening. Shalom.